for me to introduce our guest today. I first met the General, I guess it was in the 1980s at the Air Force Academy. He's a big, tall, skinny guy. There he is right there. $1 million smile.
This is our routine. He makes fun of me and I stand here and take it. So.
He was not the best student, I should tell you. But I am pleased to see him standing here. It's a wonderful, wonderful day. He's commanded at every level and served as the installation commander at the United States Air Force Academy. He's also served as a maintenance officer with the fabulous Thunderbirds. Along the way, he has served as an Air Force intern, a White House fellow, where he was named Special Advisor for Defense Policy and Intelligence to the Vice President of the United States, and I insist that you tell them that story about how you got that job. Presently, the General is the Director of Logistics, Engineering, and Force Management, Headquarters Air Mobility Command, where he is responsible for leadership management and integration of total force logistics, engineering, and force protection activities across the global mobility forces. A graduate of the Air Force Academy, ACSC, SAS, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a host of other professional schools, it is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Brigadier General Stacey Hawkins. Hawk.
All right.
Thanks for coming, brother.
Thanks a lot. So good afternoon, everybody. And I am on about 10 hours of being awake. I flew out of St. Louis at 2, and I was supposed to have a 5-hour energy before this particular session, and I did not do that. So in order for me to stay awake, kind of a reverse type thing here in the auditorium, let's keep this active and lively, and please feel free at any point in time to ask any questions. I think we got about an hour together. I'm going to rifle through some charts that I got just to try to stimulate some thinking. And then the most valuable thing that I get out of this is the questions that you ask that I have to go home and research and think about. Directors and commanders have very little time to think. So definitely want to encourage you while you're here at ACSC, as you move ahead and move on in your careers, whether you're wearing a uniform or not, this opportunity to think and to think broadly about a lot of issues is really an important time. It was an important time for me coming off of a remote. Was able to heal my family and pick up some broken glass from being gone so much in my early days, and it was also a great time to learn. Like Dr. Forsythe said, I am Stacey Hawkins, and on behalf of my boss, General Carlton Everhart, I'd like to bring you greetings from Air Mobility Command. I serve as the A4 there, and the A4 used to just be the maintenance guy. But over the past 18 months, A4 has transformed as our Air Force has transformed. And now we are provide oversight for the logistics, engineering, and force protection, that entire portfolio. So if any defenders, engineers, maintainers, loggies are in the house, we work for you. So I'd like to talk about that just for a little bit. Also want to talk about some, I call them moonshots. These are some big ideas that we're actually working through on the headquarters staff that I think will affect all of you in the room as you go out and go back into the operational part of our business. But some things that we're thinking about, and welcome your critique as to how we can maybe think about them differently if you have some great ideas. And then the last third, I just want to share some leadership thoughts and ideas that I've picked up along the way and learned sometimes through gaining scars for it, but these are just some leadership approaches I just want to commend to you for your own use or your own critique. Let's go with the next slide. Hopefully this presentation works. So this is not to go through what the A4 is, but I want to highlight that the stand-up of the Air Force IMSC, the Installation and Mission Support Center, drove the headquarters to reorganize. And we are a total force organization. We're an organization that includes defenders and engineers. And Air Force loggies, maintainers and loggies, we typically are specialized, but this reorganization has driven us to think in a big L way. Anybody in the audience ever worked a joint job before? Okay, so if you've worked in the joint world, you know up close and personal that the joint world, particularly our brothers and sisters in the Army and the Marine Corps, they think about logistics very differently. They think about logistics in terms of classes of supply, and those classes range from food, shelter, clothing, medical. Class 6 is personal demand. For those of you who came in the Air Force when I did, Class 6 was the Class 6 store where you bought your booze. But personal demand items, those are actually a class of supply. Parts, class of supply, end items, vehicles, fuel. This organization gives us an opportunity to work together to support our joint warfighters. And it's an exciting time to be a logistician in the Air Force because I think we're going to be able to provide better and more focused logistics solutions to particularly the 9 combatant commanders that AMC supports every day. Next slide. So I actually attended a course to actually round out my joint professional military education. I think you guys are getting JPME 1 credit here for attending ACSC. As you move forward, you'll either get JPME 2 when you attend SDE, or you'll have to go to a resident course at Norfolk like I did. But being in a room full of soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and airmen, I kind of got a feel for how the other services think about logistics. If you're in the Army, and any soldiers in this class? All right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I talked to my fellow soldier classmates in this class, and I said, well, what's logistics to you? Their answer was resoundingly, logistics in the United States Army is about equipping the soldier. It's about putting clothes, weapons, equipping the soldier with vehicles, weapons, air weapons, whatever it takes to enable that soldier to go to battle, to close ground on the enemy. Next slide. My sailors, who were my classmates, they figuratively said that logistics to them is manning the ship, man being used as a gender-neutral term. So manning the ship to the Navy is putting people on a vessel to go underway to provide global presence for the nation. What drove me to think, what is the Air Force's version of logistics? Before this course, as a maintainer, I'll say, hey, logistics is maintenance. Maintenance really isn't logistics. What our 21R officers do, that's really logistics for our Air Force. Maintenance is really closely related to operations. But what is logistics in the Air Force in this big L world that we're in? And when you look at the O plans that will be charged to fight in the future, adaptive basing O plans that require us to be nimble, flexible, and agile. Next slide. I believe that logistics in the Air Force, next slide please, is about fighting the base. And if you could please build this out for me. Fighting the base means what our 21Rs and our port dogs do to make sure that we're actually putting equipment and things on aircraft so we can achieve that speed that's necessary to provide what's needed to our warfighters. Fighting the base means protecting the base. And force protection is going to take on a whole different flavor when you return back to the Air Force. Just this morning, a wing commander at Scott Air Force Base actually signed a letter authorizing credentialed law enforcement officers with any law enforcement experience, 10 years is the minimum, to carry concealed weapons on our bases. It's called the LEOSA Act. It's the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act. So if not at Maxwell, when you go to bases across the Air Force, if you see someone packing, it should be concealed. But if you see them packing, they're probably licensed to do so. They're credentialed to do so. And that's our solution to actually addressing the insider threat so that we can protect our bases in a better way. Game-changing idea for the Air Force. The bases were typically federal property, sacred, guns don't come past the gate. That's changing. And then our engineers. Protecting our bases also means protecting our infrastructure and making sure that we have all of the right protections in place, right systems in place to make sure that whether we're fighting through airspace or cyberspace, that we have the facilities that we need to enable what I'll call the base a power projection platform to be able to project airspace and cyber power. Next slide. So in A4, these are just some things that I've set forward, and it's all about cross-functional teamwork. One of the skills that we haven't spent enough time teaching the officer corps in particular is how to lead and thrive in small teams. Many of you will become commanders of organizations, and we're going to say, you are now in command, and you have authority. And with that authority, go get the mission done. The mission now, I believe, is going to involve how can we form fast, agile, nimble, cross-functional teams to be able to achieve results. And there's no authority that's going to enable that. It's really the brain power and the flexibility and the collaborative capability of those teams in order to be able to achieve the results. If you could build this slide out. All of these ideas, from providing effective support to 18th Air Force, which is our numbered Air Force in AMC, to reinvigorating and ensuring effective support to our en route enterprise. That's where we get the speed and velocity that the air component provides to US Transcom. As we acquire new weapon systems, we're going to have to get better at cross-functional teamwork in order to be able to do all the stuff that's on the calendar for us to do over the next 15 years as far as acquiring and procuring weapon systems. I talked about force protection of our installations. Has anyone here heard of the term counter-SUAS? Counter-SUAS is Counter Small Unmanned Aerial System. And it's the biggest threat that you have not heard a lot about that's on the horizon that a lot of folks are fighting daily to figure out how to counter. Our enemy has counter-SUAS devices, that they call them quadcopters, that they have the ability to achieve effects, particularly on our bases and around our aircraft as an Air Force, that will be just tremendous if we don't figure out a way to disrupt that capability. And the last one is something that I would actually charge you to think about, and it's the idea of big data. Tom Friedman, his new book is Thank You for Being Late. And in that book, he talks about the impacts that big data will have in the future, which is powered by Moore's Law. And that's the law that says that the chip density on transistors and silicon chips will double at such a frequency that it will allow us to achieve computing power that has not ever been seen. And that in turn will allow so many different enhancements and effects in everything that we do as an Air Force, from how we gather information, how we store information, and how we actually provide decisions and courses of action to our warfighter decision makers. Next slide. We live in a VUCA world. VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, connected, and ambiguous. Any special operators or anyone who's worked with special operators in the audience? Special operations and that whole world, they actually assume that the world is VUCA. Most of us who spent our time in the Air Force either launching from or maintaining on bases, the world is VUCA when things are abnormal. But we have a steady state where things are normal, and then VUCA comes about when things are really abnormal. It doesn't happen very often. Think about a world where the normal state of being will be VUCA, volatile, uncertain, connected, complex, and ambiguous. And it'll be weird if nothing's happening and everything's steady state. That's the assumption I like to present to you as to how we're going to actually move forward with some of these new ways of thinking that I'd like to present to you over the next few slides. Next slide. So, a VUCA environment also applies to our fleets of aircraft. This is just the AMC picture. But what this says is that our aircraft are just plain out old. Some of this data is actually not as current, it's about a year old. But assume that since this was published, our aircraft have even gotten older. What can we do about that in a budget-constrained environment, in an environment where we don't have all of the financial resources that we're accustomed to, and we also don't have the time and space because so many weapon systems are aging at the same pace? Next slide. Everybody has a hero shot, and for a maintainer, it's usually a shot that involves aircraft. With these old weapon systems, we will also be asked to actually provide and project air power in packages like this. This is the base where I served as a group commander. And we'd like to say when we were actually maintaining aircraft and pushing the mission from this base is that we could see the enemy, hear what he's saying, tell others about him, and act to destroy him, all from one platform. When I first joined the Air Force, we would never deploy aircraft like this. We would say it's impossible to operate those types of aircraft, from tankers to ISR assets, both manned and unmanned, to C-2 platforms, to strike platforms, all from the same base. That was a logistics and an infrastructure nightmare, yet we're doing it every day. And we'll continue to do it in this fashion as we see wars become more complex and more VUCA-like. Next slide. So, from a logistics mindset, what are some logistics moonshots that we can actually dream about, start to move towards, and take on as far as problem sets that we can get at, knowing that in an environment where the threats will not just be kinetic threats, but they will also be cyber threats. What can we do about something as simple as reducing the amount of time that an aircraft is awaiting parts? This stat shows that last year AMC aircraft were NMCS for about 85,000 hours. And AMC task missions were delayed for about 46,000 hours. That's real readiness and real capability that we lost, that we left on the table. If we were a business, the CEO would have been fired, people investing in our shares and our stocks would go down, we would lose shareholder value, we would really be in bad shape if we lived and we were content with this situation that we are living with here in AMC. Next slide. What if a technology existed that could change and revolutionize the way that we deliver parts to the field? What if you could defer your time and energy and actually reduce the number of warehouses that you build? Reduce the number of people that it takes to serve as item managers, maintaining huge stocks of inventory. What if you could reduce your inventory? This next technology is something that we're excited about, and we think it'll be a game changer if we can actually take it and apply it in a military context. Next slide. So this is where we have a glitch. So I'll walk you through this video. This video is describing additive manufacturing, or 3D printing. What additive manufacturing does, and you see it happening right here, it actually takes data, part specifications, part schematics, and it actually has the ability, it actually provides the capability to beam or transfer this information to machines that can actually print the parts at the point of need. So if you were to take all of the AMC aircraft or all of the money that we invest in commercial aircraft, moving parts around the world, if you've ever been frustrated because a part was late because it was stuck in customs, this technology can print everything from a screw to an engine blade currently. What if it could print an entire flight control structure? What if it could print a fuel filter? The technology is moving fast, and if we are able to adopt and execute, it will achieve major effects in the logistics world that will translate into operational capability. Just remember additive manufacturing, and if you hear something about it, become a part of a cross-functional team that can help us actually come up with ways that we can use this technology to increase readiness and increase our warfighting capability. Let's move on to the next slide. Another big idea that we're playing around with is enterprise fleet management. Sounds really simple. Enterprise fleet management is basically looking at a fleet of aircraft, in this case a C-17. How many C-17 pilots are here? So if you're a C-17 pilot, you know that when you were training to become a C-17 pilot at Altus, you were putting the hurting on the aircraft, right? When you're doing low-level missions, you're putting the hurting on the aircraft. When you're doing SPRO landings, you're putting the hurting on the aircraft. We know what an aircraft flight hour is. We know that's an hour that an aircraft is flying in the air. We also know, and this is also true in the fighter world, that certain mission profiles will put a severity factor on an aircraft flight hour, and to the extent that we measure those over a life cycle, we call those equivalent flight hours. It will actually tell us when an aircraft will start to experience life-limiting effects and conditions. For the C-17, we know that that number is 42,750. And we also know that a 3.8-hour sortie at Altus is a 4.56 equivalent flight hours instead of just a 3.8 flying hour. So as aircraft at Altus are accruing equivalent flight hours, that becomes a serious control in how we manage the C-17 fleet across the board. Next slide. We also know, based on engineering analysis, that out of all of the surface points on the C-17 where stress is created, the W2 control point is the point that's going to fail first. And so once the C-17 reaches 42,750, it's going to be because the W2 control point, which is the point right underneath the left side of the wing that connects to the fuselage, that's going to fail, and we will have to retire that aircraft or pay an exorbitant amount of money to re-engineer and beef up that structure. So right now, 42,750 hours gets us to about 2042 for the C-17 before we will start having to retire that weapon system. Next slide, please. This is a model, and it's built to actually move, but I don't think we'll be able to actually see the motion in it. Each one of those dots, if you could go back one, please. Each one of those dots on those charts represents a C-17. You can't see it from here. Hopefully you can read it from where you're sitting in the audience. An orange dot represents a guard C-17, any guard pilots in the room, any guardsmen, period. Okay. The blue dot represents an active C-17 weapon system. And the green represents a reserve C-17. We've modeled that based on which threshold we use to determine when to swap a C-17 from the active component to the reserve component, we can actually extend the life cycle for the C-17 upwards of 22 years. What's preventing us from doing it is our inability to collaborate across components to build a business rule set that would facilitate extending the life of a weapon system that we're going to need for as long as we have warfighter requirements. Why is this so important? Next slide. As I said before, if we are able to conduct swaps and to institute a set of business rules that will allow us to lengthen the life cycle, that's 14 aircraft retained over a 22-year period. The C-17 fleet currently is 222 aircraft. All 222 are used to support 9 combatant commanders across the joint force. If we lose 14 aircraft, that is enough of a percentage to where that's one O plan that goes without strategic lift. To the extent that we can actually incorporate this and build a cross-collaboration, cross-functional teamwork in order to be able to facilitate an enterprise fleet management business rule set, we can save capability, we can restore readiness, and we actually create the trading space for our 4-star senior commanders to be able to modernize and acquire new weapon systems across the board. And I think the next slide shows all those weapon systems that we're going to be faced with having to recap. Next slide, please. These are all the weapon systems from now until possibly 2040 that we have to find a way to either recap or bring online. We've never had this many weapon systems come due at one time for a recap or acquisition. Usually we're able to phase it out. But if you talk to the advocates for each one of these systems, every single advocate feels as though that they are late to need with getting a new Minuteman III replacement, getting an AX, getting a new TX. My boss says that we're getting the KC-46. That's only a third of the tanker requirement that he needs in order to be able to satisfy combatant commander demands. We're also looking at a new PAR. Probably heard a lot of tweets about that in the news. We're looking at a new JDAM, a new EELV, a B-21, all these weapon systems. So where does something like the strategic airlifter fit into this calendar? Next slide. And if it does, do you want the C-17 of 2040 to look like this? If you have an A2AD fight to take on, do you need a C-17 that looks like this? Next slide. Or something that looks more like that? Something that's more autonomous, something that has a blended wing, something that's more fuel efficient, something that has more defensive capability. So these are the debates that I think all of you will be walking into in some way or another, either as a commander or working on a staff, when you're looking at what needs to happen to our Air Force to be able to provide airspace and cyber power in the future, but particularly for our warfighters who depend on those three things to basically keep war as an away game and to make sure that we're winning wars 100-0 versus 51-49. Next slide. So last area I'd like to talk to you about is just leadership. And this is just my definition. I do believe leadership is about mobilizing people. I believe it's an activity. It's not leadership that you actually are able to affect by sending a lot of emails out. And it's about mobilizing people towards progress. You know, some people talk about leadership and that progress is not involved. So I just want us to establish that as kind of where I'm coming from when I talk about leadership. Next slide. So if you can see this, these are just clusters that are represented on a slide. And you'll see 2 names up there. You'll see Robert and James, and you'll see 3 clusters. Based on the way that those clusters are designed and the lines connecting the dots, who do you think is the better leader? based on where you see Robert position and where you see James position. Okay, got a Robert over here. Anybody think James? So here's where I'll challenge you. I would probably say that most of the folks in this room, at least when I sat over in that area over there at ACSC, I guess about 14 years ago, everything that the Air Force had poured into me was to teach me and to create a James type of leader. I was a great maintenance officer. I was a great AMUOIC. If you asked me to go be an AMUOIC right now, I would jump at the opportunity. I'd gotten pretty good at understanding how a flight line worked. I knew how to generate sorties. Came to ACSC, followed that with a year at SAS, found myself as a squadron commander, and being a good AMUOIC meant nothing to anybody. Being a Robert, being a broker, how well I got along with the Force Support Squadron Commander, how well I got along with the CE Squadron Commander, how well I got along with my other maintenance group commanders became the report card that I was graded by. As you move through this year and as you take on jobs and as you start to face more VUCA type problems, don't make the mistake of thinking that remaining a James type leader, remaining the best person in the jet, remaining the best engineer in the wing, remaining the best budget officer that the wing has ever seen is going to key success in your future jobs. Let's build this out a little bit. And these are some of the organizations that we need Roberts or Robertas to actually take on as far as building those collaborative relationships. Can we build this out? So when you're working with organizations like the IMSC, when you're working with AFPC, when you're working, if you're in logistics, working with the Sustainment Center or the Lifecycle Management Center, if you're working with an acquisition project, working with half or MAJCOM staffs, it will really matter what networks you've established, what relationships you've built, and how well you can actually extend the reach of your organization into those other centralized organizations that, unfortunately, in some cases, control money and resources and people. Just something that I like to commend to you as you move through your IDE year and head back to the Air Force. Next slide. So as far as what I think makes a leader work, I just boil it down to 4 capabilities, and this is a model that that's been popular in academia. And they're really just 4 basic capabilities I think any leader has. Sense making, relating, visioning, and inventing. I think it's important to know which ones you aren't good at. So I'm pretty decent at sense making, I think. I'm being a little bit arrogant, but I think I can come in, make sense of a situation and figure out what's going on, who's who, and operate from there. Kind of been built that way. Most people think I'm extremely good at relating, but I'm awful at it, and it takes all the energy that I have every single day to be nice to people. It really does. And when I go home, I turn off, and I may say 5 words in my household. I'm married and have 2 sons. Everybody else is talking, and it takes a whole lot of energy for me to even get a word in edgewise. And I'm just not designed that way. So when I am working in environments like I am now, because I'll run out of energy, probably around 1,300 every day, I will hire or I will find people who never get tired of relating to be around me to help communicate messages that I want to get out without sounding like I'm mean. I will find people who I'm getting ready to hit send on this email. I need someone to read it and help me relate to the organization I'm trying to relate to because I don't have it in me now to be nice. So know who you are. I'm very good at visioning. I got these moonshots all over my slide presentation because I got these things I want to do that's 20, 30 years out, but I am really short on execution. I have to really work hard, and I have to find people to critique my moonshots to say, there's no way we're going to get there in the next 50 years, so stop dreaming about that. You may fit this in a different way. You may be extremely good at inventing, but not good at visioning. You may be extremely good at relating, but not good at sense making. There's some folks who are awful at sense making. They can't see a problem if it smacked them in the face. But understanding as leaders how to identify and have honesty with yourself looking in the mirror, but then how to surround yourself and build teams around your capabilities or lack thereof, in order to be able to maximize what you're good at and to mask constructively what you're not. Next slide. And maybe another video. Yeah, so this is another thought. So we're going to build this out. Kind of wanted to ease this on you a little bit. All right, it's going to all show up there together. So if the meritocracy only produces homogeneity, then the system is less likely to deliver optimal results. Okay? That's what I believe. If you put a group of people in the room and they are all like Stacey Hawkins, beware, there's going to be a very horrible idea that comes from that group. Because Stacey Hawkins is not very nice, he doesn't like to relate to people, he's long on vision, short on execution, and you may get something that resembles close to what sense making looks like. So this video that I was going to roll talks about Saturday Night Live. And who would ever think that a show like Saturday Night Live would have the cultural impact and in many ways the political impact that it has. And it's been going on for years and years and years. The death of Saturday Night Live has been projected for many times, and yet it still comes back. And the key to Saturday Night Live's success is the executive producer. I think it's Lorne Michael. And what he does is he actually deliberately orchestrates having as different people in a room together, spouting out ideas, and trying to bring a diversity of thought into the room. And if you are quiet in any of his meetings, he will actually poke you in the chest to force you to speak out. Now, if you have to take a hill very fast, you probably don't want to subscribe to that type of thinking and that type of organizational design. But if you're trying to tackle a VUCA problem, and you're in a room, and everyone in the room looks exactly like you or thinks exactly like you probably have a problem. And I would put a lot of money that before you even start tackling the problem, you will come out with a suboptimal solution. How do you do that as a commander? How do you do that on the staff? I think you just speak it. You speak to it. I know my weaknesses well enough, and because my wife has actually brought them to full light in front of me for over 25 years. And this really sounds like, it sounds somewhat provocative. I rarely make a big decision, and I've been doing this probably for about 7 years as a commander and now as a director. If I'm in a room and everyone is in a room and we're getting ready to make a big decision as to whether to discipline someone, as to whether to advise a 4-star on an issue, if all men are around me, I will stop and I will find a woman somewhere. And that sounds really weird. Why would you do that? Well, I just know the limitations of men. And I know that whatever solution that we are going to come up with, even if it's the right way to go, the way that we're going to go about it probably could use a different perspective. And I have worked around enough women as leaders and enough women as far as understanding how they sense make problems and men sense make problems that it's radically different. And if you empower that and if you embrace it, just test it out and see how your decision making changes and how even if the substance of it doesn't change, the packaging and messaging will. And if you're a woman and you're in command or you're a director and you're making a decision and all women are in the room, which probably is less likely to happen, then find a way to mix up the complexion of the room, whether it's gender, whether it's background, whether it's how you grew up, whether it's ethnicity. Find a way to leverage that, because if you do, I think it has a direct impact on the quality of the decisions that we're making as leaders. And in a VUCA world, binary decisions just don't go very far because the problems aren't binary anymore. Next slide.
Another team that
I was going to play.
Okay. Saturday Night Live. Again, you would think these are a bunch of smart asses who would, are going to make jokes at each other. They're not going to spend a lot of time coddling each other, and yet
That's exactly how they came together. No, it's exactly right. If you talk to people about Saturday Night Live, about why that show succeeds, they'll say it's a miracle, right? You have a bunch of egomaniacal comedians and writers who basically, for most of their lives, have hated other people. And then they get together and they make a live show every week. And they'll say that the reason why is because of Lorne Michaels, the executive producer, because he runs meetings in this very specific way. He forces everyone in the room to speak up. You have to say something. And then he'll stop a meeting if you're looking distracted and say, Fareed, I notice you're looking off. What's going on in your life? What's happening with you? Why aren't you in this conversation? As a result, everyone feels like they have to speak and that everyone's listening to them. And what's interesting here is that there's a basic tension, I think, in Saturday Night Live, at Google, in these findings, between efficiency and productivity, right? Efficiency would say, get the expert to stand up, have him say his piece, and then everyone else shut up and listen. But productivity oftentimes means you listen to the weakest member of the team. You ask them to speak up. You interrupt a meeting to say, what's going on inside your head? You look distracted. That's how we get really productive instead of simply busy and efficient.
All right, thanks. So the next slide talks about some other warnings and things that I want to just commend to you. Leadership is always distributed. It's not a solo act. I used to try to be the person standing on the hill to say, I am the leader, I'm the commander, I have authority, hear me roar, and it just didn't get me very far. Leadership is personal, no best practice. I cannot be as great of a leader as many of the leaders that I've worked for. I can't be extremely formal. I am not a serious leader. I have to have a goofy aspect to the way that I exist, and that just works for me. So be who you are, and we are selecting you at this point in your career, not because we have to fill these seats up. Every single one of you was selected because we wanted you in that seat. And if you change who you are, it's like we failed because we didn't get who we were bargaining to get. So don't lose your identity. Don't forget where you came from, and don't forget where you want to go by retaining your identity. I believe leadership is good management. You can have great leaders who are great visionaries, but you got to be able to deliver results. And it's about making things happen, which is why I'm always leery on being too long on vision. Leadership is about changing things. If you take a command or if you go to a job and you were able to just mind the story and things are exactly the way that they were when you arrived, you may have been successful, but I would submit you didn't lead anything. And this is just a warning. If you're really, truly leading, someone's going to come after you. If you think about a lot of our great leaders in the course of human history, the ones who really tried to do something that was really big, they were assassinated. Now, I'm not trying to say that in the Air Force, by leading, that you're going to be assassinated. But don't get discouraged if you're actually trying to move something down, if you're trying to move the ball down the field. And you get a lot of folks who are saying, I don't want to do that. That doesn't make sense to me. With this enterprise fleet management, I have a lot of people in the reserve component who want to just stamp that idea and can't wait till Stacey Hawkins moves on. And they are rightfully concerned about enterprise fleet management because if you're a guardsman, I think we have one over here. Which state are you from, ma'am? Washington State. So enterprise fleet management, for an active duty guy talking about supporting warfighters, I get paid to have that interest. If you're a Washington State guardsman, you get paid to look out for whose interest? The governor and Washington State's interest. So if I'm moving aircraft all around and I'm basically, setting you up to fly all the Air Force's old aircraft while we get new ones, you're concerned about that. So instead of taking it as a direct assassination attempt from Washington State or another guard unit, I take it as how do we construct a solution or a business set of business rules that will accommodate Washington State's interests as well as the Air Force's interests enterprise-wide. So it's dangerous. Next slide. Believe in this stuff. At the end of the day, it's kind of what we're going to be judged on. And I'd like to leave and commend a book to you. And it's kind of about a year old now. The book is called The Road to Character. Do y'all read that here? The Road to Character is written by David Brooks. And next slide. He actually talks about 2 sets of virtues. And whenever you're working with someone, I'm going off on a little bit of an aside, it's important to know what's important to folks. And I found over time that I used to not think about, okay, I assume that if you're wearing this uniform, that the things that I think are important are the same things that you think are important. And we all wear this uniform for different reasons. You know, I think patriotism is probably a part of it. Some folks wear this uniform because there's a certain power that they get from wearing this uniform. Believe it or not, as unhappy as you may be with your salary, some folks wear this uniform because there's a monetary benefit to doing so. Some folks wear it because, you know, there's a sense of purpose. Some folks like being a part of a winning team. Everybody has their own thing that makes them tick. This even happens operationally. Last year I was involved with the whole evacuation of family members from Turkey. Was anybody part of that? Anybody stationed at Incirlik when we had that evacuation? And I laid out this brilliant logistics plan, had the whole staff together. We were clicking. We had cross-functional teams. We had all the right people in the room. It was a diverse group of folks. We had all the ideas out. We did all the things right and say, we're ready. Joan Everhart, here's the plan, how we're going to logistically get all he goes, Hawkins, we got a problem. I said, what could be wrong? We laid it all out. There's nothing wrong with this plan. He said, the families won't leave without the pets. So I forgot that to a lot of folks, the most important thing is their pet. And so it blew up my entire plan, and I had to go back and we had to figure out how to get all the pets and all the things that pets bring on the aircraft so we can get the people out. So it's always important to look at what's important to the people you're working around. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the book, and I'll close with this. There's a video I like to show, but it may not play. But Brooks in this book talks about eulogy virtues and resume virtues. The first 10 years of my career, I was going after achieving all the resume virtues I could find, and actually came close to putting my family at serious risk in my marriage in doing so. I went 5 straight years where I was gone 250 days out of the year. I was the Thunderbird maintenance officer doing that, and I said, okay, I'm going to go do some more resume virtue building. I'm going to go to Korea after the Thunderbirds. And so 5 straight years until I came here and realized I had a lot of broken glass on the floor. It took 2 to 3 years to capture what I had before I went on my resume virtue hunt. Eulogy virtues, and this is really important because my wife tells me at the end of the day, you know, she will get a chance to actually put an inscription on my tombstone because I will die before she does. And she's already told me, just in case you're wondering if I'm, really cranking out the work or bringing work home or staying too long in front of my computer at home, Brigadier General will not be on your tombstone. So if you really want to earn the inscription that I get to write for you, how about going after some eulogy virtues? And at the end of the day, trying to strike that balance, I think is important. And how do you do it while still doing this really important work? But if you get a chance and you read this book, I think it's just a great way to kind of keep a reminder in the back of your brain that you can't help but still go after resume virtues. It's kind of how we're built. It's why we all are in this business. It's why we're all type A. And resume virtues are linked to survival. But at the end of the day, your legacy will be defined by eulogy virtues. So I will stop there. And hopefully this was something that at least got you thinking. And I'd like to save the balance of my time for any questions you may have. I'm jealous of you. I would love to buy back your age. I would love to have a chance to be at ACSC to do some real thinking. Would love to be, surprisingly, probably wouldn't think I would say this, I love Montgomery, Alabama. Yeah, so it's not a bad place to hang out. So at your disposal to talk about anything ranging from logistics to life or anything else that you want to critique or throw out that I may have said. Thank you for all of your service and your leadership, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. Hi.